The doctors believed 9-year-old Leo had only days left to live. They were right about the timeline, but they were wrong about the medicine. Because the cure that was coming to room 308 didn't arrive in a syringe. It walked in on 4 paws with a heartbeat full of loyalty and a secret no one could have ever predicted. It wasn't just there to fight a disease. It was there to fight a ghost. In the coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, the rain has a way of washing the color out of the world, leaving behind 100 different shades of gray. It's a town where the sky often weeps and the fog rolls in from the Pacific like a ghost blurring the line between the sea and the shore. High on a cliff overlooking this turbulent water stands the Seacliff Memorial Hospital, and inside, in its oldest wing, is room 308. For 37 days, this room has been the entire universe for Elena. Her world had shrunk to the size of a hospital bed, to the pale, still face of her 9-year-old son, Leo. He wasn't just sleeping. He was lost in a place no one could reach, a prisoner of a rare and cruel disease called autoimmune encephalitis. In the simplest terms, Leo's own body was attacking his brain, extinguishing the bright spark of his mind one synapse at a time. The sound of her universe wasn't laughter or conversation. It was the rhythmic, synthetic beep of the machines that breathed for him that told her he was still here. Barely. Elena, a single mother who had always been her son's fiercest protector, was now a helpless bystander. She had memorized the patterns on the linoleum floor. She knew the exact moment the evening fog would swallow the lighthouse in the distance. She'd hold Leo's small, limp hand, tracing the lines on his palm, whispering stories of their life before this, before the longest silence began. The man who delivered the final verdict was Dr. Eris Thorne. He wasn't a cold man. In fact, his compassion was what made him so good at his job. But he was a man of science, a man who trusted in data, in charts, in studies published in medical journals. And every piece of data in front of him screamed the same terrible conclusion. He had just left Elena's room after delivering the words that no parent should ever have to hear: "We're out of options." Now he stood in his office, the glow of the computer screen illuminating his frustrated face as he reread Leo's chart for the 10th time, as if the words might magically rearrange themselves into a cure. But they never did. The science had failed. And this is a lesson we often learn far too late in life. The quietest rooms often hold the heaviest burdens. Hope is not the absence of despair, but the sheer stubborn will to take one more breath, even when the air is thick with sorrow. Now, it's fascinating, isn't it? For centuries, we've heard stories of animal intuition that defy logical explanation. Many of you might have heard of Oscar the cat in a Rhode Island nursing home who seemed to know with chilling accuracy which patients were about to pass away, curling up beside them in their final hours. Or you might have read about dogs whose incredible sense of smell allows them to detect cancer cells in humans long before any of our advanced medical equipment can. We often dismiss these as charming anecdotes, as coincidences. Our modern world teaches us to trust the machine, the data, the science. The common mistake is trying to force an anomaly into a box of what we already know, instead of having the courage to admit that maybe, just maybe, our box is too small. Back in room 308, the failure of medicine had created a vacuum, a space of pure desperation. And it is in vacuums like these that the unexplainable is sometimes given permission to enter. All the data had been analyzed. Every known treatment had been tried, and every one had failed. Dr. Thorne had closed the file. The nurses had softened their voices, their professional sympathy turning into something more profound, more human. The longest silence in Leo's room was about to get deeper. The only thing left to do was to say goodbye. And that final heartbreaking goodbye was about to trigger the most impossible beginning. Saying goodbye is the final act of letting go. But what happens when the one you're saying goodbye to refuses to leave the head nurse, a woman who had seen 30 years of heartbreak and miracles walk these halls, made a decision that wasn't in any hospital manual? She broke the rules. One quiet phone call to Elena, a hushed instruction to use the service elevator, and a promise to look the other way. And him padding softly down the sterile corridor came the one visitor who wasn't on any approved list. Barley, the family's 2-year-old golden Labrador. A trained therapy dog would have waited for a command, its behavior shaped by hundreds of hours of repetition. It would have offered a generalized, gentle comfort. But Barley wasn't a therapy dog. He was family. He walked into room 308 with a sense of purpose that stilled the air, his tail giving one slow, determined wag. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the bed, past the silent machines and the grieving mother, and gently nudged his head under Leo's limp, unresponsive hand. Then, with a soft sigh, he rested his head on the small rise and fall of his boy's chest. For a full minute, the only sound in the room was the hospital's cold, metronomic heartbeat. Elena held her breath, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. A young nurse stood frozen in the doorway, witnessing a quiet goodbye. And then it happened. A single impossible twitch in Leo's fingers, resting on Barley's soft fur. Elena blinked, thinking her grief-stricken mind was playing tricks on her. But then it happened again. A faint, yet definite curl of his fingertips. And then the machine that had been charting a path to the end changed its tune. The erratic, panicked rhythm on the heart monitor suddenly smoothed out, falling into a steady, strong, rhythmic beat. It was a sound of life, a sound of a fight. Now anyone watching would assume this was simply the beautiful, unshakable loyalty of a dog for his boy. And they would be right. But they would also be missing the most critical piece of the story. Because what was unfolding in room 308 wasn't just a miracle, it was a reckoning. You see, this wasn't just a story of a dog saving a boy. The truth was that the boy had already saved the dog. Just a year ago, Barley wasn't Barley. He was just a number on a cage at the Astoria Animal Shelter. He was a shivering, anxious creature, abandoned, and so terrified of the world that he refused to make eye contact with anyone. Families passed him by looking for a happy, playful puppy, but not Leo. For a week straight, Leo had his mom bring him to the shelter, and he would just sit outside Barley's cage, not trying to pet him, not making loud noises. He would simply read to him his small voice, a calm, steady presence in the dog's chaotic world of fear. On the 7th day, the dog got up, walked to the front of the cage, and licked Leo's hand through the wires. Leo didn't just choose a dog, he healed one. What was happening now in this hospital room, this wasn't an act of instinct. It was an act of reciprocity. It was a debt of love being repaid. This is a profound lesson we often forget. Loyalty is a language spoken without words. The most powerful connections are not built on grand gestures, but on the simple, silent promise to stay no matter what. Over the next 24 hours, the miracle escalated. Leo whispered Barley's name in a feverish sleep, the first word he had spoken in over a month. When Dr. Thorne ordered a new set of brain scans, he stared at the images on his screen in stunned disbelief. The catastrophic swelling in Leo's brain, it was receding. He stormed out of the imaging lab and found Elena in the hallway. "It's medically impossible," he stammered, his scientific composure shattered. "This is a 1 in a million spontaneous remission." But here is where we so often get it wrong. We are quick to label the unexplainable as a coincidence, to dismiss an anomaly, so we can keep our neatly organized view of the world intact. But the data on that screen was irrefutable. The steady beat of that heart monitor was a fact. The boy was getting better. The disease was in retreat. The science was in shock. And for a moment it seemed like the storm had passed. But Barley, who still refused to leave his post at the foot of the bed, knew something no one else did. The fight for Leo's body was ending. But the fight for his soul was just about to begin. And the enemy wasn't a disease. It was something much, much older. Have you ever walked into a room and felt a sudden chill, even though the windows were closed? A feeling of being watched when you knew you were alone. We often dismiss these feelings as a draft or an overactive imagination. But what if they aren't? What if they are a warning? As Leo's body began to heal, something else in room 308 began to fracture. The atmosphere of hope so palpable just days before was slowly being poisoned by a quiet, creeping dread. And the first one to sense it was Barley. His behavior shifted in a way that was deeply unsettling. He stopped sleeping. For hours on end through the long, quiet nights, he would sit bolt upright at the foot of Leo's bed, a silent golden sentinel. But he wasn't looking at Leo. He was staring with an unwavering, unnerving intensity into the darkest corner of the room near the rain-streaked window. A low, guttural growl, so quiet it was more of a vibration than a sound, would rumble deep in his chest. Leo, now lucid and speaking in short, weak sentences, felt it too. He started becoming agitated as the sun went down, his eyes darting towards that same corner. "Mom," he'd whisper, his voice trembling, "the cold man is watching." At first, Elena and the nurses thought it was a side effect of the medication, a phantom of his recovering brain. But then came the drawings. Leo had always loved to draw superheroes, his pages filled with vibrant capes and explosive action. Now his sketchbook was filled with a single recurring image, a tall, impossibly thin figure drawn with jagged, angry lines. It had no face, just an unnerving emptiness where a face should be. And this is where the lesson lies. Not all battles are fought against flesh and blood. Sometimes the greatest courage is shown in standing guard against a darkness that only you can see. Dr. Thorne, a man whose entire career was built on finding rational explanations, was unraveling. The boy's recovery defied all medical logic, and now this shared paranoia between a child and his dog. It was too much to be a coincidence. Unable to let it go, he did something highly unorthodox. He descended into the hospital's archives, a dusty basement filled with the forgotten records of 100 years of life and death. He was looking for a pattern, a clue, anything. And he found one. He found the file for room 308, and he found the story of a man named Silas. Decades ago, Silas, a bitter recluse, had died in that very room alone and consumed by resentment for a world he felt had abandoned him. Tucked away in the margins of old nursing logs, Dr. Thorne found sporadic, strange reports from that room ever since sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature, objects falling from shelves, patients complaining of nightmares, and a feeling of being watched by a cold, angry presence. This wasn't random. The entity in the room had a history. It had a name, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The cause and effect was terrifyingly simple. The powerful positive energy created by the bond between Leo and Barley, this brilliant beacon of love and loyalty, had acted like a floodlight turned on in a dark, forgotten attic. It hadn't created the watcher in the shadows. It had woken him up. And Silas did not like the light. The conflict in the hospital was no longer just about medicine. The head nurse, a woman named Carol, who trusted her 30 years of experience more than any rule book, made a choice. When the administration sent a formal request for the dog to be removed, she took the paperwork, walked to the shredder, and turned it into confetti. "What paperwork?" she said to a younger nurse. "I didn't receive any paperwork." She was putting her entire career on the line, choosing to trust the instinct of a dog over the logic of men. The watcher was no longer content to just watch. The energy in the room was growing heavier, colder. Barley's low growl was becoming more frequent, more urgent. He was no longer just a guardian. He was a soldier digging in for a fight. The miracle of Leo's recovery was now under siege from a force that couldn't be treated, couldn't be medicated, and couldn't be seen, except by the two souls it was trying to tear apart. And on the horizon, a storm was brewing both outside the hospital walls and within them. The silence was about to be broken. Fear is a patient hunter. It waits in the quiet corners of a room, in the silence between heartbeats. But when it finally decides to strike, it doesn't just whisper. It screams. The storm that had been threatening Astoria all day finally broke, unleashing its fury on the coast. But the tempest outside was nothing compared to the one that erupted inside room 308. It began with a flicker of the lights, a classic horror movie trope that was suddenly terrifyingly real. Then, with a loud buzz and a shower of sparks from the ceiling fixture, the room was plunged into an unnerving, inky blackness. Elena gasped, fumbling for her phone. The emergency lights in the hallway cast long, distorted shadows through the doorway, but inside the room there was nothing. The emergency generator had failed, but only for this room. And then the cold hit. It wasn't the damp chill of an Oregon night. This was a deep, penetrating cold that felt like it was crawling out of the walls, a cold that carried with it a palpable sense of malice. The monitors running on their last seconds of battery power began to shriek in protest. Leo's vital signs were crashing. His small body, which had been resting peacefully, suddenly convulsed. Elena screamed his name, a raw, primal sound of terror. "Doctor." Thorne, who had been reviewing the old hospital logs just down the hall, heard the scream and ran his shoes squeaking on the slick floor. He burst into the room and saw a scene from a nightmare, Elena trying to hold her son, the room freezing, and the heart monitor flatlining. A single unending tone that signaled the end. But in the midst of the chaos, Barley was a pillar of absolute focus. He leapt onto the bed, placing his body over Leo's. But he wasn't looking at the dark corner anymore. The threat was no longer lurking there. It was here. It was everywhere. Barley lifted his head and barked, not at the corner, not at the door, but straight up at the ceiling directly above Leo's bed. And this is the moment where everything you think you know changes. Because what came out of him wasn't just a bark. It was something more. It was a deep, resonant, impossibly powerful sound that seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate to hum with an energy you could feel in your bones. Now there's a scientific principle called resonant frequency. It's the idea that everything has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. If you can match that frequency with a powerful enough sound wave, you can shatter it. It's how a singer can break a wine glass with just their voice. What if a malevolent energy had a frequency? And what if a bond of pure, undiluted loyalty could generate the exact sound needed to destroy it? But Barley wasn't acting alone. In that same instant, Leo, his body caught in the grip of the seizure, did something extraordinary. His hand, which had been clenched in a fist, opened, his finger extended, and on the thin hospital blanket he weakly traced a single simple shape. A circle. The same shape as Barley's dog tag. It was a symbol, a connection, a non-verbal command from a boy to his guardian, anchoring the dog's raw power to a single point of focus. The bark and the symbol connected, and the room exploded. With a deafening crack, the large window overlooking the ocean shattered, not inwards from the storm, but outwards, as if a tremendous invisible pressure had been expelled from the room. And just as suddenly as it had arrived, the bone-chilling cold vanished, replaced by the normal sterile warmth of the hospital. The single horrifying tone of the heart monitor was broken by a beep. Then another, and another. A steady, life-affirming rhythm returned, strong and defiant. Dr. Thorne stood frozen, his scientific mind completely short-circuited. He looked at the shattered window, at the panting, exhausted Labrador, and at Leo, whose convulsions had stopped his breathing, now deep and peaceful. Elena was clutching her son, sobbing not in terror anymore, but in a wave of overwhelming, disbelieving relief. And here is the most important lesson of all. Love is not passive. It is not a gentle, comforting thing that sits quietly in the background. It is an energy, a force. And when it is focused, when it is pure, it has the power to stand in the face of absolute darkness, bare its teeth, and roar. It has the power to shatter the coldest of shadows and call a soul back from the very brink of the abyss. The fight was over. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of despair or even fear. It was the silence of awe. After the storm, there is always a quiet. In the aftermath of the window shattering, the air in room 308 was not just calm. It was clean. It was as if the very molecules in the room had been purified, scrubbed clean of a darkness that had lingered for decades. Leo's recovery after that night was not just rapid. It was total. The doctors and nurses who came in the next morning spoke in hushed, reverent tones. They changed his chart, they logged the data, but they knew what they were witnessing had nothing to do with medicine. Leo remembered nothing of the cold man, nothing of the terror. His memory of that night was a blur, a forgotten nightmare. His only clear, unwavering memory was of Barley, his golden guardian lying faithfully by his side. When the day finally came for him to be discharged, the nurses and staff didn't just line the hallway, they formed an honor guard. And as Leo walked out one small, steady step at a time, holding his mother's hand, Barley trotted proudly beside him, his tail held high. No one said the word miracle. They didn't have to. Everyone who had witnessed the events in room 308 understood. They had seen it. But a story like this doesn't just end when the patient goes home. It leaves scars, not on the body, but on the soul, changing everyone it touches. Room 308 was quietly closed for renovations. Its number was removed from the door, and it was eventually converted into a small, quiet chapel for families. An unwritten rule whispered among the veteran staff and passed down to the new ones became known as the Barley Protocol. In the most hopeless of cases, the rules about visitors were known to bend just a little. Elena, her heart overflowing with a gratitude too vast for words, found her purpose. She began volunteering every weekend at the Astoria Animal Shelter, the very place Leo had found Barley. She would sit with the scared, the abandoned, the overlooked animals, and she would tell them stories, her calm voice a beacon of hope, helping other families find their own silent guardians. And Dr. Eris Thorne, the man of data and science, was changed most of all. He didn't quit his job. He didn't start proclaiming the existence of ghosts. His transformation was quieter, more profound. A large anonymous donation was made to the hospital a month later, specifically to fund a new state-of-the-art animal-assisted therapy wing. And in the top drawer of his office desk, beside his stethoscopes and medical journals, he kept a small framed photo. It wasn't of Leo. It was a picture he had taken on his phone the day of the discharge, a proud golden Labrador looking out towards the sea. It was his private, humble reminder that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our medical textbooks. Months later, as the last rays of a brilliant Oregon sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, a boy and his dog ran freely on the beach. Leo's laughter, clear and strong, was carried on the salty wind as he threw a piece of driftwood into the surf. Barley, his golden coat gleaming, bounded into the waves, a creature of pure, unadulterated joy. They were two souls forever bound by a battle no one else could ever fully understand, a boy who was saved, and a sentinel who had fulfilled his promise. And that is the final, beautiful truth. This story isn't about ghosts or hauntings. It's about the tangible, earth-shattering power of an intangible bond. It's a reminder that the greatest sentinels, the most loyal guardians, don't always carry shields or wear uniforms. Sometimes they have 4 paws, a wet nose, and a quiet loyalty that asks for nothing in return. The greatest miracles don't always descend from the heavens. Sometimes they walk into our lives, look us in the eyes, and silently promise to stay until the storm passes. Every single one of you listening right now who has ever loved an animal has a story. Maybe it's not as dramatic as this one, but it's just as important. It's the story of the cat who curls up on your chest when you're sad, the dog who greets you at the door like you've been gone for 100 years, the quiet comfort of a heartbeat next to yours in the dark. That bond is real, it's powerful, and we want to hear about it. In the comments below, tell us the name of the animal that stands guard over your life. Let's fill this comment section with the names of our guardians, our best friends, our family. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of a special bond in your own life, please take a second to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that these kinds of stories matter and helps us share them with more people. Finally, if you believe in the power of storytelling and want more tales of hope, courage, and the incredible connections we share, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories to share with you. Until next time, hold your guardians close.